Towards the south of the known world is a new and ambitious country. Born out of conquest, the Grand Duchy of Karameikos is a burgeoning power, full of potential and promise. But underneath its thin veneer is a people with a long history steeped in superstition and tradition, much different from their Phaeacian rulers. And in the dark places of Karameikos are strange and hideous creatures, where only the foolhardy go to seek long-forgotten treasures, or a quick death. Hi, I'm BECMI Berserker, and welcome back to my channel. It's time to explore the first of the Gazetteers that supported the known world, the BECMI Dungeons and Dragons campaign world. There's a link to an overview of this setting on the screen and in the description, which I advise you to watch to put this video into context. Today we'll be looking at Gaz1, the Grand Duchy of Karameikos. A good place to start, as it expanded on the default introductory setting detailed in the BECMI expert rules. If you're new here, then welcome. This is where we explore the BECMI edition of Dungeons and Dragons, released between 1983 and 1986 in 5 box sets, and also as an amalgamated rulebook called the Rules Cyclopedia in 1991. If you wish to know more about BECMI, then please follow the link on the screen to my BECMI playlist. Gaz1, the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, was written by Aaron Allston and published by TSR in 1987. It was a softcover book and had 64 pages, and was accompanied by an A1-sized colour map of the duchy and some of its major locations. The cover separated from the main book and had 3 panels with more maps, so that it could double as a Dungeon Master screen. These maps included a closer look at Specularum, the duchy's capital, and a player's map showing Karameikos in relation to its closest neighbours. The contents of the book were separated into 2 parts, the Gazetteer section and the Adventure section. The Gazetteer section takes up the bulk of the book, with background and campaign material, with the Adventure section only taking up 4 of the 64 pages. We'll explore why that might have been later. First impressions of the book are that it is good value for money. Although there are illustrations here and there, the book is text heavy. Therefore it contains a lot of information that isn't padded out with artwork. However, if you are someone who likes a lot of art with your RPG products, you might be a little disappointed. That said, in my opinion, that disappointment would be offset by the depth of the information within. Another demonstration of value is the table-sized map, which is about A1 in size. This is in full colour, utilising the hex format and terrain symbols common at the time, so no high art comparison here with what you might find in modern Sword Coast and Forgotten Realms products, but this map provided a more functional purpose, allowing easy calculation of travel distances. It also left you with enough ambiguity to make your own decisions about what actually lies in a particular location. I do have one criticism of the map though, and that's the poor contrasting of place names against the map background. Some are really difficult to read, especially over mountainous areas. This was printed in the days before reader accessibility was really a consideration for publishers, but someone with colour blindness might have a real problem with trying to see many of the place names. Despite this issue, the map is full of interesting information, and players of earlier published adventure modules will spot where those adventures were set. The most influential of these has to be Night's Dark Terror, written in 1986 and often touted as the greatest BECMI adventure module of all time, which I agree with. That module detailed many areas of Karameikos, which are included in this Gazetteer, enriching the landscape with people and intrigue that was capitalised on. Second in influence has to be The Failed Society, released in 1984. Although focused on events in the capital city of Specularum, it introduced powerful families vying for supremacy, the same families that appear in the Gazetteer, demonstrating continuity. If you've ever watched Professor Dungeon Master's Reviled Society series, you will quickly realise it was based on this module. Gaz1 incorporated many of the ideas presented in these 2 modules, ensuring consistency with previously published content, and building on that work to provide depth to any campaign within the setting. So let's start exploring the Grand Duchy of Karameikos. What kind of place is it? Who are its people? And why is it called a Grand Duchy? Is it not independent? Well, over 2,000 years ago, the land now known as the Grand Duchy of Karameikos was once occupied by an ancient race of humans called the Traldar, who were themselves descended from the now forgotten Nithians, who once had an empire across the known world. The Traldar were a primitive people, akin to a Bronze Age culture in our own world. After many years they grew a modest and successful civilization. However, their success and wealth soon drew the attention of what in history have been referred to as beastmen, who invaded from the west and almost destroyed the Traldar. Only through the heroic deeds of the great King Halev and his companions Petra and Zirkev did the Traldar force back the beastmen and win back their peace. The impact of this invasion was never fully recovered from, with the Traldar retreating into isolated communities without any centralized governance. Over the subsequent centuries, the Traldar began to refer to themselves and their land as Traladara, as they traded with their neighbours. They looked back to the time of King Halev as their golden age, and told of his struggles in an epic work of poetry called The Song of King Halev, believing that Traladara would one day have a second golden age when King Halev would return to lead them. However, in the years since the fall of King Halev, Traladara was stuck in its own dark age, lacking any centralized leadership and becoming an attractive location for hideous creatures like vampires and werewolves to make home, due to the fact that they could take advantage of the isolation of many of its communities. In addition, migrating elves, dwarves, gnomes, orcs and goblins all found space within Traladara where they wouldn't be bothered, and so made parts of it their home in their own way. Traladara existed like this up to just 100 years ago, when its largest port, Marilenev, was conquered by the neighbouring empire of Thyatis. This changed very little in Traladar outside of Marilenev, mainly due to the isolation of most Traladaran communities. However, despite this conquest, Traladarans on the whole benefited from Thyacian trade links. The port of Marilenev was renamed Specularum by the Thyacians, meaning the Mirror City, and was fortified to protect Thyacian interests, becoming the capital city. Just 30 years ago, a young Thyacian nobleman called Duke Stefan Karameikos III, a friend of the Thyacian emperor, offered to trade all his ancestral lands in Thyatis with the emperor for autocratic control of Traladara. The emperor, seeing the value of these lands and the opportunity to have an ally in the west, agreed to these terms. Duke Stefan left for Traladara, renaming the territory the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, and he has ruled from Specularum ever since. But why call the country a Grand Duchy and not a kingdom? Well, Stefan was conscious that any hint of independence could be capitalized on by nations on his borders, so by creating the illusion of fealty to Thyatis, he potentially stalled plans for incursions by enemies. Despite early insurrections, Duke Stefan has instilled control over the entire territory by installing ambitious Thyacian nobles as rulers of certain areas, with mixed results. Ultimately, 30 years later, in the current year of 1000 AC, meaning 1000 years after the crowning of the first Thyacian emperor, Duke Stefan rules a country with a burgeoning economy, but it is still beset with peril due to the denizens that thrive in hidden places, and there is much for the hard-working independent adventurer to do before the Duke may call himself king. So, with that bit of background out of the way, what kind of character can you play in Karameikos? Well, Gaz1 dedicates a little over 5 pages to character generation, for characters specifically from the duchy. For all classes, this includes determining your social class and where you hail from. But for human classes, you are also able to determine whether you are of Traladaran, Thyacian, or mixed heritage. Oh, and in respect of elves, there are 2 clans available to be from. So let's have a quick look at how a character's background is determined in this Gazetteer. Let's imagine I have rolled up a human class, let's say a magic user. I have rolled up my stats in the usual way, as per the BECMI rules. However, I am from the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, so would like to understand a little bit more about where I've come from and who I am. I should quickly state that none of this is required, and a player can of course come to an agreement with the DM about their background if they want, but in my opinion the randomness of the following process is quite fun and has no mechanical impact on the value of a character. So first, let's look at determining my magic user's social standing. As you can see on this table, I need to roll a D percentile to determine this. And wouldn't you know it, I roll a 2. Meaning my poor magic user is penniless and, according to the description of this social status in the Gazetteer, is dirt poor. My starting gold is everything my family could beg, steal and borrow, and they own no property. Well, my magic user intends to change all that by going to seek my fortune. With the help of a burly fighter type, I hope. Okay, so I'm a dirt poor hedge wizard that my family is betting their entire fortune on. But what's my heritage? Am I Traladaran, Thyacian, or mixed? Well, I can roll on this chart to determine this. However, I'm told that I may add 1/2 of my social standing roll to this roll to influence the outcome. So I get to add the huge total of 1 to my roll. Let's see how this goes. Whoa, 87. Okay, so 87 plus 1 equals 88. Checking the chart shows that I am of mixed heritage, and as I was closer to being Thyacian than Traladaran, according to this chart, I'm going to have my magic user favour those physical traits when writing up his description. This isn't a mentioned recommendation or anything, it just seems logical to my weird brain. Okay, so putting this together with my social standing, I'm going to say I'm the offspring of a disgraced Thyacian soldier of low rank, who was stripped of his commission and had to make his own way in a foreign land. He sought comfort in the arms of many a Traladaran woman at local inns, until one of them fell pregnant. Unfortunately, she had strong links to the Thieves' Guild, who threatened the hapless ex-soldier to make an honest woman out of her. 5 pregnancies later, she pushed out my magic user, who grew to be a little taller than his siblings, but his waifish frame ensured he avoided the rough and tumble of his peers and spent his time reading books that his family stole from better-off homes in his hometown. But which hometown? Where is my magic user from? The following table invites me to roll d20 and add the shown modifiers to determine this. So let's do it. An 18. I add my +4 for being a magic user, and note no other modifiers to apply. Looking at the table, I can see that anything over 17 means I am from Specularum, the duchy's capital. So clearly there were many opportunities for my thieving family to obtain books when my magic user needed them. He's not proud of this nefarious behaviour, but, you know, in the pursuit of knowledge, morality is fluid. So there you have it, 3 dice rolls later, and I feel at home in the duchy. I have a better understanding of my place in the world and how I fit with the social environment. And you heard how quickly I was able to put these pieces together to come up with a character background on the fly. There are no mechanical benefits to this, but at least my DM may consider giving me a bonus in future if I wish to attempt something that aligns with my experiences growing up in that environment. Something like +1 to a roll to get information out of the lower classes. It's completely arbitrary, which is its strength. Let's turn quickly to backgrounds for demi-humans, and you can see here that there are specific tables to roll on depending on race. Social standing is not an important factor of Elven society, hence their rather simple table, but you may be either a Kalari elf or a Vialia elf, which influences where in Karameikos you're from and how integrated you are with the wider Karameikan society. That said, players of elves are free to choose where they are from, be it a forest dwelling or the capital city of Specularum. But being a Kalari or Vialia elf may influence that decision. Dwarven and halfling societies are far more hierarchical, with all Karameikos dwarves hailing from the dwarven town of Highforge, although you can work with your DM about where you currently reside. and halflings, being a lot more integrated in Karameikan society than other demi-humans, can generally be found anywhere, although far less numerous than humans. Turning back to my magic user, it's interesting to note that in this character generation section, there are a few paragraphs on spell availability in Karameikos. We are told that Karameikos is not very advanced when it comes to magical instruction, with only a limited number of spells known by the Magician's Guild in Specularum. In my opinion, this really fits with the BECMI field described in the basic rules. Magic is rare and hard to come by, and magic users are extremely guarded of their knowledge, careful not to share it with others in case they themselves may be overpowered. Therefore, it stands to reason that only a limited number of spells would be available, with the presumption being, here's a few spells for free, but if you want more, you're going to have to find them for yourself. Hence a magic user's reason for adventuring. The final part of this character generation section introduces the concept of skills to BECMI. This was a new concept at the time of the Gazetteer's publication, which, over the subsequent years, grew to become an entire chapter of the later Rules Cyclopedia, released in 1991. I cover skills in more detail in my video on that publication, available via the link on the screen, so I won't repeat myself here. However, the skills listed in the Gazetteer appear relevant to life in the Duchy, and so, if you wanted to use the skills mechanic, you could tie your character more strongly to the land with things like leatherworking or storytelling, which is a very Traladaran thing to do. There are a couple of Karameikan specific aspects to character creation that I should mention. The first is that it is recommended that you do not use the titles for character level progression, as described in the basic and expert rules. This is because the Grand Duchy of Karameikos has its own titles to bestow. The second thing is that there is a specific Traladaran custom which requires mentioning, as it could be the springboard for many an adventurer's life. This is what's called the Shearing Ceremony, a custom which requires all young men between the ages of 14 and 19 to be cut off from their family, or sheared, to live a life of independence until they have proved themselves worthy of prospering on their own. This shearing is demonstrated by the cutting of the young man's cloak along the bottom, left ragged to mark the shearing. Once the sheared youth has demonstrated their ability to prosper over a number of years, he may return to his family to be judged whether worthy of acceptance again. This Traladaran custom has such strong approval amongst the citizens of the Duchy that many Thaiatians have adopted it. Although the shearing ceremony is required of all young men, women may volunteer to take part if they wish to. I assume the custom is male-centric due to classically defined gender roles, but in game terms, there is no effect on whether your character is male or female, unless you want there to be. I love the idea of the shearing ceremony. It has many real-world parodies that enables it to feel realistic, and its simplicity evokes something primeval in me, and I can sense the strength of resolve in a people who basically put their kids through the school of hard knocks, not knowing whether they'll come back alive or not. I guess why women are not automatically required to take part is the traditional preference being to protect the potential for your people to grow rather than literally throwing that potential to the wolves. However, I do wonder whether this viewpoint would be conducive with modern D&D publications, where equality of opportunity trumps all, even if it does mean your village heading for rack and ruin because you've restricted your ability to reproduce. So, now we've examined player character options in the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, let's dive into the next couple of parts of the Gazetteer, which centre on politics and society. The details of these intersect quite a bit, hence looking at them together. We are first introduced to the political powers of Karameikos, which goes into some detail about the extent of ducal powers, which essentially consist of the power to assign lands and titles, as well as remove them, the power to raise armies, assess and demand tax revenue, and determine the law of the land, and the power to execute justice, establish national and international policy, and some other lesser additional powers. So why would you need to know all this? Well, in my opinion, this information is made available because no assumption is made about your knowledge of how an autocracy or monarchy works. Without this knowledge, You could quite easily muddy the waters in terms of which lords or barons have the right to determine anything. Having this backdrop allows you to consider the ramifications of player activity and whether it is even deserving of the Duke's attention. There are 5 other political powers in Karameikos that are deserving of mention, although the 5th would only emerge in special circumstances. The first is the nobility, consisting of the royal family and landed nobles, and who are mostly Thaiatian in origin. Although extremely rich, this group's power is tempered by the fact that they rule over a majority Traladaran population that isn't always cooperative. The second power is the old Traladaran families. Displaced and far poorer than they were before the Thaiatian invasion, these families, the most notorious of which are the Murilanev, Toronescu and Radu clans, try to exert political power whenever possible to progress Traladaran issues. Although that might seem noble enough, their motivations are very much self-interested to ensure they remain at the top of Traladaran society. The third power is the guilds, consisting of numerous trades that, if mobilized, can influence policy by restricting their services. In my opinion, this would be rare, but it does demonstrate that there is an element of people power in Karameikos. The fourth power is the clergy, made up of the Church of Karameikos and the Church of Traladara. They have the power to manipulate the minds of their worshippers should they wish to do so. Although there are the odd firebrand clerics out there, the heads of these churches are thought to be reasonable men. That said, there is the obscure cult of Halav that operates in the margins, who believe that Duke Stefan is indeed King Halav returned. So far this idea has not taken off. The final fifth power is the military, which currently appears to support the Duke fully. This power may emerge as more relevant should this support ever become ambiguous. Of course, there exist the powers that work outside of the law, and the Duchy is not immune to nefarious criminal organisations. The known ones consist of the mafia-like Veiled Society, which I mentioned earlier, the Iron Ring, a disparate slaver organisation that is based in the Black Eagle Barony to the west of the Duchy, despite slavery being illegal in the rest of the country, and the Kingdom of Thieves, which functions much like a typical thieves' guild, conducting heists and burglaries, etc. So now we have an idea of the power dynamic in Karameikos, let's have a quick look at how society ranks the nobility and the Duchy's citizens. You may remember that I earlier mentioned it is recommended not to use the default titles for character progression, as detailed in the basic and expert rules. This is because how citizens are ranked are shown in this table. As you can see, they are listed by social class and clergy and military equivalent. What's interesting is the social value Karameikons place on particular people in society. You can see here that Karameikons hold soldiers to the same social standing as convicts. The reason for this in the Gazetteer is because they are bound by duty and without rank. I'm not entirely happy with this description, as higher ranked people in the military would still be bound by duty. In my campaign, I would keep the social standing the same, but explain the soldier-seaman standing being equivalent to a convict as being because the population is overwhelmingly Traladaran in origin, who may harbour some resentment. This resentment may still exist up the ranks, but it would have less impact on an individual. That's just how I would do it, but of course it's up to you. What's really interesting is the status of the clergy in Karameikos. According to the Gazetteer, a cleric gains the title of priest at 3rd level, the same as in the core BECMI rules. So at 3rd level, your character already has the social standing of a court lord, the lowest rank of nobility, but noble nonetheless. They remain titled priest until 7th level, when they become a bishop, potentially being offered land, and at 9th level, they leave their title of bishop to become a patriarch or matriarch, which affords them the same rights, responsibilities, and benefits of a knight. For anyone else, they would have to climb the social ranks through their deeds, hoping for recognition from the Duke after some daring adventure, potentially benefiting from a reward. Your social standing in the Grand Duchy of Karameikos is what opens doors. Need an audience with the Duke? Well, unless he's heard of your deeds and your value, you can forget it. It's a system as old as time itself. Reputation is all, as Uhtred of Bebbanburg might say. Several pages of the Gazetteer are given over to describing what exactly each of these social ranks are, including what political powers come with them, what your potential for influence might be, and how you might expect to be treated, including any forms of address you're entitled to. And to immerse you further, included within these pages is a mini-adventure called Davinos Complaint, where the characters are introduced to the machinations of Karameikan politics, both inside and outside the confines of the law, the outcome of which might incur the ire of powerful enemies. As I continue through the Gazetteer, I'm struck by the amount of detail on offer. We're introduced to a deep dive on the clergy, including the military arm of the Church of Karameikos, called the Order of the Griffin, a sanctioned group of holy adventurers that drives the values of both Karameikos and its church. We are also treated to 3 pages of detail on the duchy's military forces, completely compatible with the war machine rules of the companion box set, including the purpose of each unit and where they are stationed. What I love about this is the use of nicknames for some units, such as the Sword of Halef or the Goblin Crushers. It really brings them to life. In addition, we are offered information pertaining to the laws of the land and what might happen to you should you fall foul of them. And even 2 pages on how Karameikans dress, both formally and informally, which is considerate of both male and female attire. Suddenly that Davinos Complaint mini-adventure has got so much culture that might be brought into it. Interspersed amongst all this are small illustrations suggesting the default layout of a Karameikan inn or manor house, which on the surface might seem like a bit of filler, but on deeper thought actually offer you an insight into what Karameikan and Traladaran architecture is like. I'm pretty sure that an inn situated in Specularum will be different to one in Ilarum, but these illustrations can inspire dungeon masters to consider cultural influence when running games. I mean, how many times have your characters been in a tavern? And how many times has that tavern felt different to the one across the border? Not many, I bet. These small touches nudge one's creativity to contemplate elements and join dots that might not have previously been considered. The section on Karameikan society concludes with the nation's calendar, which reflects the one published in the adventure module, Night's Dark Terror, that I mentioned earlier in the video, except that it's been changed from that publication to now have each month consisting of 28 days, meaning the lunar year is exactly aligned with the seasons. We are given the names for each of the 12 months and the names for each of the days of the week, and offered probabilities for celestial events, should a dungeon master want to add them. In addition, we are given dates of importance throughout the year, so that they may be weaved into any campaign located in the duchy. I think this calendar is a really nice touch, but the fact that the lunar year matches the seasons seems just a little too contrived to me. So many things would have to line up to have a perfect calendar like this. Still, it might be possible due to the intervention of an immortal, so maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe it's referenced somewhere in all the BECMI material I've yet to read. If you have a view or more information on this, leave a comment so it can be discussed. That said, the book provides a calendar, and it's a good one, that evokes the feel of the land nonetheless. Gaz1 moves into 2 more pages of content providing important information on the nation's economy and geography. If taxation and administration is your thing, you won't be disappointed, and the Gazetteer is fully compatible with the Dominion rules of the companion set. What's interesting to note is the reference to the naming of certain coins. A gold piece is referred to as a royal, a silver is a krona, and a copper is a kopek. No mention is given to the naming of platinum or electrum pieces, and no reason is given for their exclusion. Of course, it's your choice whether you introduce this naming convention into your own campaign, but it's good flavour to give depth to NPC encounters when negotiations are in royals rather than gold pieces. The geography of Karameikos is explained with reference to the table map in terms of land patterns, terrain, waterways, and other geological features, including potential monster lairs. What's a really great touch here, and something that's clear on the map, is the use of dual language for many features. As Karameikos is a young country, there are many places Thyacians have named differently from Traladarans. For instance, what Thyacians call the High Reach River is called the Valaga in Traladaran. It's a small thing, but with profound ramifications for cultural interactions. Your characters might be able to tell a lot about an NPC from just how they refer to places. And living in the UK, this dual language approach is similar to what we might see on the road signs in Scotland, Wales and Ireland, and even Cornwall, which, if you didn't know, is a duchy. I'll say no more. After being presented with the economy and geography of Karameikos, we are finally offered 6 pages on its main locations and communities, as shown on the screen. What was immediately apparent when reading these was how much the population of these locations has been increased from descriptions in the expert rules and the adventure module Night's Dark Terror. In actual fact, it's been increased by a factor of 10. So, where Threshold was previously presented with a population of around 500, now it has 5,000. I'm still not sure how I feel about this increase. With that much of an increase, the duchy suddenly feels far more developed than it was previously, and less of a wilderness. I understand that these populations are concentrated in towns and villages, but that kind of growth requires a safe and stable land to support it, and I'm not certain that the description of a wild and new country is congruent with these population sizes. I think I prefer the more frontier-like population sizes given previously, but that's just me. It's an easy fix and it comes down to the Dungeon Master in the end. But what do you think? Did any of you feel the same way? Or did you just not care? I'd love to know. Anyway, each settlement is supported with information regarding 4 factors. These are its ruler, its population, any laws or customs that deviate from the law of the land, and notes which offer background information including the names of certain NPCs that live there, as well as adventure ideas. What's interesting is that the descriptions do not labour on the detail, giving just enough for you to formulate your own ideas about how to take what's presented forward into your own games. After reading this information, I came away feeling I understood how everything worked. Despite the substantial amount of information on offer, it was easy to consider how to manipulate the information in any way I wanted and not break anything. I just came away with the feeling that if I was running a campaign in the duchy, I would feel in control of it and not continually driven to align with the contents of the Gazetteer. One particular settlement I'd like to draw your attention to is Fort Doom in the Black Eagle Barony, situated in the west of the duchy. Once the Traladaran fishing port of Halleg, Fort Doom is now home to Baron Ludwig von Hendrix. TSR really had fun with names back then. Commonly known as the Black Eagle, Ludwig is the first cousin to the Duke and rules his barony with an unscrupulous iron fist, where his people exist as serfs, if they're lucky. Duke Stefan watches and waits for his moment to rid himself of this troublesome man, and his infamous court wizard, Bargle. In addition to the information on settlements, we are treated to a section on what's referred to as strange sites. These are particular locations worthy of note, most of which have appeared in adventure modules, and deserve a mention here to tie up any loose ends or suggest ways for integration. It's a useful addition for bringing things like this together. Finally, we reach the largest section of the Gazetteer, which is 18 pages centering on 44 non-player characters located throughout Karameikos, a veritable who's who that your players may end up interacting with. In this section we are positively spoiled. It consolidates characters mentioned previously in the book, and for each one provides their name and title, their default location, their background or history, their personality so that we can understand what drives them, their appearance so that this may be relayed to the players, DM notes, which is extra information a DM might want to consider when inserting one of these characters in their campaign, and combat notes, which is essentially their stat block and spells, if they have any. Of particular interest are the DM notes, which detail political and economic intrigue, and the position each character takes on matters relevant to them. This is not as overwhelming as it may sound, and ties together so much of what has come before in the book. meaning that its placement towards the end of the book actually makes sense. It works as a kind of consolidation, and I found it beneficial in terms of helping me formulate ideas as the cast of characters fit naturally into the world I had just read about. There are many overlapping themes here which just beg to be explored, and underpinning it all is the unspoken rivalry between Thyacian and Traladaran as they work together in spite of themselves to build their shared country whilst endeavouring to ensure their own people maintain or gain superiority. Following this section there is a brief segment on monsters common to Karameikos to enable you to build an ecosystem conducive to the environment. In addition, we are introduced to two new monsters, the Chevelle and the Nosferatu. The Chevelle was first introduced in Night's Dark Terror, but is detailed here again, it being a shape-changing centaur that can transform into a horse, created by an immortal to guard over the mistreatment of horses. The Nosferatu is completely new, and is essentially a vampire that drains blood instead of levels. Basically the classic vampire. However, Nosferatu also retain their previous character class levels and powers, and can be any alignment. This opens up enormous potential for plot devices. I love this simple twist on the classic BECMI vampire, and would be likely to use it in a future campaign. Finally, we reach the adventures section I mentioned much earlier in the video. Being only 4 pages long, it's not short on ideas, and it builds on many of the adventure hooks already provided in the details on locations and characters, so this is just a real bonus. Split into basic, expert and companion level adventures, it offers a total of 21 plot hooks to get you started, many of which pull on the background information of the NPCs to quickly immerse you in the goings-on of the duchy. The adventure section ends by listing and suggesting 4 official adventure modules that are set in the Grand Duchy, 2 of which I've already mentioned. These are B6, the Veiled Society, B10, Night's Dark Terror, X10, Black Arrow Red Shield, and X12, Skarda's Mirror. A small amount of text is offered to introduce the plot of each of these to help you choose what might be right for your campaign world. So there we have it, Gaz1, the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, the first of the Gazetteers on the known world that would later be called Mystara. So what are my thoughts? Well, it has been quite some time since I read this right through, so there was so much I had taken for granted that really came to the fore as I analysed the book for this video. Simple things like its 3-column presentation that helped making reading the dense text easier, or its pacing as it slowly built up the duchy around you without making it overwhelming, so that when you met the cast of characters, they were familiar to you. This is a source that can sustain numerous campaigns without getting old. There are subplots to every subplot within the towns and the cities, and we haven't even touched on the potential for dungeon delving. Overall, the Grand Duchy of Karameikos could be viewed as the vanilla Dungeons and Dragons setting. I mean, it's your classic Eurocentric medieval backdrop, with a bit of magic sprinkled over the top. But be in no doubt, this is wild Madagascan high-end vanilla, the kind that only grows once every 28 seasons. This is a rare piece of work. It's tight, consistent, cohesive, and easy to adapt to your needs. Gaz1, the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, deserves your attention. Duke Stefan is seeking adventurers. Will you answer the call? Well, I really enjoyed talking about this book. So many ideas sprang out of my head for games that I'll never have the time to play, but it was just great to contemplate the possibilities within this fantasy world. Thank you for sticking around with me till the end. Please like and subscribe if you think I deserve your future attention as I continue my trip through the Gazetteers. If you enjoyed this video and wish to support my channel further, then please consider buying me a coffee, link on the screen and in the description. Otherwise, I'm BECMI Berserker. Keep making your saving throws and I hope to see you back here soon.